One of the things I love about our church is every week there's a mix of people who watch and people who attend who believe in God and people who don't believe in God. People who followed God a long time, a short time, used to follow God but gave up over time. So I want to start this episode with a question that applies to all of us. Have you ever held on to something you knew was harming you? Yeah, of course you have. So have I. Maybe it was a dating relationship that you stayed in even though you knew it wasn't healthy. Maybe it was a job that was hurting your relationship with your family. Maybe it was a belief that was holding you back. Maybe it was a habit, smoking habit, a drinking habit, spending habit, an eating habit that you knew just wasn't good for you. In some cases, you had a doctor warn you what would happen to you if you didn't break the habit, and you kept doing it anyway. Which leads to this question. Why would a reasonably intelligent person hold on to something they knew was harming them? Why would we choose to do something we know isn't in our own best interest? What does it cost us when we do? Hey, thanks for tuning in to Journey at Home. Our goal is to make it simple for you to connect with Jesus. So do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications, because not only will that help you not miss any of this helpful content, it'll help other people on YouTube find this content as well. Now, this is episode 2 of our series, White Flag. It's a series for all of us who find ourselves running from God from time to time. Some of us, we run quietly. Others of us, we run defiantly. But we've all intentionally chosen to do something we knew God didn't want us to do at some point in our lives. We've all gone in a direction we knew God didn't want us to go. And the reason we run is because we'd rather hold on to what we want, even if it ends up hurting us, than surrender to what God wants, even if it'll help us. So I want to run a little thought experiment. If you were God and you loved you the way He loves you, what would you do when you saw someone running towards something that you knew would hurt them? Well, the same thing any loving parent does when they see their child running towards a busy street. You'd run after them. You'd do whatever it takes to get their attention and stop them. And if necessary, to keep them from doing it again, you'd provide some discipline to them. So maybe it shouldn't be surprising that God allows consequences and chaos and some pain into our lives at times, because that's often the only way we learn. Now, if that doesn't sound very loving to you, I just want you to lean in the next few minutes, because God may be more loving towards you than you realize. In the first episode, I introduced you to the initial part of Jonah's story. So Jonah was a Jewish prophet who lived in the 8th century BC, and he was asked by God to do something that he didn't want to do. Jonah was living in Israel. He was in a town called Gath-Hepher when God gave him a message to deliver to the Assyrians, who were Israel's enemies. So instead of traveling up to Nineveh, the capital city of Assyria, and risking his life to give this message, Jonah heads down to the port city of Joppa in Israel. He jumps on a trade route ship headed west, and he heads all the way to the Spanish town of Tarshish. He took off as far in the opposite direction of where God wanted him to go as he possibly could. But in spite of all that, God not only knew where Jonah was, He ended up bringing some consequences to get Jonah's attention. God sent such a violent storm that these sailors who were on this ship with Jonah, these sailors who'd spent their entire lives at sea, they were terrified. So Jonah finally admits to them he's the reason behind the storm. He tells them the best way to stop the storm is just to throw him overboard. To which I'm like, well, I would have thought the best way to stop the storm is for Jonah to say, God, I'm sorry, I'll go to Nineveh. But this is true of all of us. We all have a tendency to hold on to things that are harming us. And Jonah wasn't going to let go of his autonomy in that moment, his ability to call the shots in his own life. So he says to him, I'd rather you toss me overboard, boys. And that's where we left Jonah off last episode, treading water, when the story says this happens, that the Lord provided a great fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was inside the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Now, if you have a hard time believing this is true, just don't let that cause you to miss the moral of the story. I believe it happened this way because Jesus actually said he believed it happened this way. But I don't want you to miss a bigger message that's going to help all of us who have found ourselves holding on to things even though we knew those things would hurt us. So here's what the writer says happened next. From inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. And here was his prayer. Jonah prays, he says, in my distress, I called to the Lord, which is just a fascinating part of human nature, isn't it? Whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, whether you even believe in God or not, have you ever found yourself praying in a moment when life was falling apart around you? Maybe you're staring at a pregnancy test going, oh God, please don't let me be positive. Or you're in the back seat of a police car going, God, please let me get out of this somehow. Or you're about to come clean to your parents about something and you're praying, God, please keep me out of trouble here. Or you're sitting in the driveway. You're about to go in and have a conversation with your spouse you never wanted to have. And you're praying, God, just please don't let them leave me. See, whether you're a Jesus follower or not, in our distress, when we're staring down the consequences and the chaos from our choices and our rebellion, we all have a tendency to pray, God help, please take it away. Because you know what? Pain has a funny way of overcoming our resistance and our rebellion, doesn't it? Now, here's the encouraging part. As Jonah prays from the place of his rebellion, he tells us that God answered him. He says, from the depths of the grave, I called for help, and you, God, listened to my cry. Jonah says, in spite of the fact that I'm running from you, that I've rebelled against you, you never gave up on me. You still listened and you helped me, which is great news. God listens to the desperate cries of desperate people, even people who've created their own desperate circumstances. So here's what Jonah goes on to pray. He says, God, you hurled me into the deep and into the very heart of the seas. The currents swirled about me. He's describing what happened. All your waves and breakers swept over me. The engulfing waters, Jonah says, threatened me. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever. Which, if I could just pause here, that sounds pretty miserable, doesn't it? But that's what it took to get Jonah to change his ways. Jonah goes on to pray, but you, God, brought my life up from the pit. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, rose to your holy temple. Now, the next thing Jonah prays is, in my opinion, the moment when it all clicks for Jonah, and he begins to realize what his running from God has cost him. Jonah prays, those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace, the unconditional, unearned, undeserved favor and goodness and love of God. They forfeit the grace that could be theirs. So what's it mean to cling to worthless idols? Well, every time you choose to run, you're not just running from God, you're also running to something. You're running to a person, you're running to pleasure, you're running to money or a lifestyle that you're absolutely confident is going to give you what you're looking for. So in that moment, you are giving highest value and worth to whatever you're running toward. And whatever you give highest value and worth to, well, that's what you worship. It's what you hold most tightly. Whatever you give highest value and priority to is where you derive your identity, your value, your worth. It's what you look to in order to find meaning and significance and purpose in life. The problem is there comes a point in all of our lives when we get the thing we've been running to, and then we discover we're still empty, that it's not fulfilling, it's not satisfying. In Jonah's words, it was a worthless idol. Unfortunately, what most of us do when we discover that is we just start chasing another worthless idol. We think, I must need more money. I must need another thing. I must have married the wrong person. I guess I need to date somebody else. But Jonah was wise enough to realize the whole time that he had been clinging to his autonomy to give him worth. I get to call the shots in my life. I'm in control. He realizes that whole time he'd been making a terrible exchange. He had been forfeiting the grace of God that could have been his all along. But he traded experiencing God's goodness and presence and favor in his life for something that was empty. I've definitely been guilty of that, and I bet you have too. But here's what we've all got to recognize. When you give up on God, you miss out on grace. You miss out on the thing that you actually need and want the most, which is why running is so dangerous, because rebellion causes you to waste weeks and months and sometimes years of your life pursuing things that turn out to be worthless. And I know they're worthless because in those moments when we're in despair and things are bad, we don't cry out for what we've been chasing, do we? We don't cry out for that person or another party or more money or another promotion to come to our rescue. No, in our moments of desperation, we always cry out to God, because in our heart we instinctively know there is nothing we need more than Him. There's nothing we need more than His love, His forgiveness, and His grace. But it often takes us being broken and busted just like Jonah before we ever learn that. Well, Jonah finally got it. So here's how he ends his prayer. He says, God, but I, with a song of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed or promised, I will make good. Salvation comes from the Lord. In other words, I'm finished running. I'm ready for grace. I'm coming home. And then the writer tells us that the Lord, after this prayer, commanded the fish. It vomited Jonah onto dry land. And then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. And God said to Jonah, "Go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim to it the message I give you." But this time, the writer says, Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord. And he went to Nineveh. Because by then he'd realized that the thing he didn't want to give up was actually standing in the way of the relationship he didn't want to live without. Can I tell you something? That's always true for you and me too. The thing you're holding on to so tightly, the thing you're running after so hard, the thing you don't want to give up, what's standing in the way of the relationship you don't want to live without. Because you don't want to live without God's love, grace, forgiveness, and purpose being personal to you. But the thing you keep running after, the thing you keep holding on to, what's harming you, because it's keeping you from that relationship you want most. So what I want to do as we wrap this up, I want to provide you an opportunity just to do what Jonah did. To stop running. To embrace the grace that Jesus offers you. To stop clinging to whatever worthless idols you're chasing. And to choose the relationship that will instead change you. Because my guess is the reason some of you are watching this is because you're going through right now what Jonah did. You've been running for a while, but the chaos, the consequences of all your choices are starting to catch up with you. And now you're not sure what to do. So you hit play on this, hoping to find some help. And you honestly can't believe I'm talking about this right now. It's like, how did he know my story? I'm just telling you, it's all of our stories. And God's trying to get your attention before you waste another day or another month or another year or another season of your life forfeiting the grace that could be yours. See, missing out on the goodness God wants to give you, it's a high price to pay. So why not stop running? Why not wave the white flag and surrender? Why not run to God instead of running away from Him? Right now, would you just tell God, wherever you are, just say, God, I'm tired of running from you. I'm ready to run to you. I'm done holding on to things that harm me, that hold me back. I just want to hold on to you and your grace from now on. So thanks for sending Jesus to die and rise again so you could forgive me for my rebellion. Now listen, here's the great news. When you cry out to God in your distress that way, well, He's going to answer you every time. He's going to freely give you His grace and His forgiveness. Because while you may have given up on God, remember, He never gives up on you.